Hi, guys. This is chapter 4, Cultural Beliefs. It's interesting that our textbook is the book it says, meaning a cultural approach, and this is one of the smaller chapters in the text. So, cultural beliefs are rooted in some form of symbolic inheritance, beliefs, ideas, and understandings, both implicit and explicit, about person, society, nature, and divinity. Norms and moral standards are that arise from these beliefs, ideas, and understandings. So, norms and moral standards arise from these beliefs, ideas, and understandings. I'll repeat that again. Socialization, is the process by which people acquire the behavior and beliefs of their culture. So basically, we learn from experience within our culture. Now, you'll notice the difference between the American culture and other cultures. So you come from what we call an individualistic culture. So you're in college to benefit yourself. Not that other people won't benefit from that, but you do go to school to get a degree, to get a better job, to get more pay, things like that for yourself. And in turn, it does benefit people in your family, for instance, your children, whatever. In a collectivist culture, it's not about the individual. It's about the society. It's about the community. It's about the culture versus the individual. Now, beliefs and standards for raising children also learn through socialization. There are three outcomes that are shared by all cultures: self-regulation, how we regulate ourselves; role preparation; and source of meaning. Adolescence and emerging adulthood encompass all of these socialization outcomes. Now, like I was talking about individualism and collectivism, so cultures place value on independence and self-exploration in individualistic cultures, or obedience and conformity in collectivist cultures. So collectivist cultures will promote development of the interdependent self, while the individualistic cultures promote the development of the independent self. Now, in different cultures, you have broad and narrow socialization. So what that means is broad socialization favors individualism, like Western cultures, while individualistic cultures will promote the development of the independent self. So in that case, narrow socialization favors those collectivist cultures, the non-Western cultures. Cultures define the range and focus of acceptable personal variations. We accept things like tattoos, earrings, things like that in individualistic culture, while in some collectivist cultures, tattoos, things like that may be frowned upon. Cultures differ in the degree of restrictiveness they impose on their individuals. Narrow socialization is to collectivist cultures or collectivism, as broad socialization is to individualism. So, now, in your text, you'll see something called the law, and it ties in with socialization, so make sure you look at that. Adolescent socialization among the Australian Aborigines involves ritual teachings of a set of cultural beliefs known as the law. So, moral precepts for conducting interpersonal relationships like marriage. For instance, here, we date, we meet somebody, we date, we may go to marriage. In some of these other cultures, they may have arranged marriages from birth, and their dating rituals may be different. Like, for instance, you may have to go with the parents on a date, things like that. Explanation for how the world began is also in the law, and instructions for rites of passage. The law is a set of guidelines about relations between individuals, between society, and divine forces. The law is the premise, or is premised upon collectivist beliefs. Globalization has dramatically affected the relationship between adolescents and the law. So a lot of times you'll have cultures where the adolescents try to branch out on their own when that is not how they work in that society. Now, living in American majority and minority cultures, research has shown that cultural beliefs of American minority cultures tend to be less individualistic and more collectivist than beliefs of the American majority culture. It's interesting, back when I first started teaching, I had my students watch a movie called Avalon and write a paper on it, and it basically showed, talked about immigration and things like that, but how family life in the United States was different back then than it is now. Before, you would have dinners like on a Sunday with extended family members, aunts, uncles, grandparents, and so forth. You don't see that as often in this culture anymore. But some of the minority cultures within the United States still hold on to those types of traditions. So it's interesting to see the difference within our own United States, the different cultures and how they handle family and extended family, things like that. Now, in a lot of the cultures within the United States, families have moved far across. Some family, like I have a brother-in-law and sister-in-law that live in California, and a nephew, and we don't get to see them very often because they live across the United States. On the other hand, I have a sister and a brother-in-law with children that I do see more often because they only live a couple towns over. So things have changed in our society from back in the day till now. Now, going back to socialization, one of the things I wanted to bring up that I forgot was there are different sources of socialization. So you have family, which does in our culture diminish in adolescence because the adolescent is trying to get their own identity or autonomy. They'd rather spend time with their peers than their family. And moms and dads out there in this class, here's the thing. You don't matter as much to them in adolescence. Nothing wrong with that. It's normal because they're trying to get their own identity. Other sources, peers and friends, school, community, workplace, media, legal system, and cultural belief systems. So I just want to make sure I go back to that because it's important to understand that there are many different sources of socialization. Now, religious beliefs and cultural beliefs. Virtually all cultures have religious beliefs of some kind. The content of religious beliefs is diverse. Typically, it contains some form of prescriptions for socializations, for roles, those self-regulation, the source of meaning, and typically a specific code of behavior, how we're supposed to behave. Now, like for instance, perfect example. We know when we go to a funeral, or majority of funerals, you're not jumping up and down and saying, yay! You're not doing that. It's more of a solemn experience, and it shows respect to the people that have lost somebody. So we learn how to do that through socialization, also through mom and dad teaching us and things like that, but it's all ties in with the idea of socialization. Now, religiosity in adolescents and emerging adults in developed countries tend to be less religious than those of the traditional cultures. Secular countries like Japan and Europe, you'll see in your text, they talk about that. Americans are more religious than developed countries. So we're influenced by parents' religiosity and ethnicity, and it's interesting. We're raised in a certain religion, say, for instance, and we follow that religion to a point, and then at some point, usually around college age, we question things because we become better critical thinkers. We are able to make our own choice, not always making our parents happy, but and a lot of times kids going away to school, for instance, they may decide, hey, I'm not being watched by my family, so in turn, I may not go to church like I used to. Or they did something the night before where they weren't going to get up in the next morning. Now, where do I want to go here? So, staying in religiosity in adolescence, worldview, religious development involves the community. In Islam, during Ramadan, for instance, pre-pubertal Muslims may choose to fast or not. After puberty, religious practices among Muslims becomes less open to individual choice and more guided by social pressures. So there will be fasting. Well, why is religious faith especially strong among African American adolescents? When they reach adolescence, for instance, Muslims are expected to participate in month-long fasting of Ramadan. So, my question here is, and this is something I want you guys to put in the discussion section on Canvas, is why is religious faith especially strong among African American adolescents? Write your answer in there. Just curious. You never know. You might get extra points on your tests. You never know. So please follow through with that. Now, the decline of religiosity in emerging adulthood. Religious participation and beliefs decline throughout the teens and are lower in the late teens and early 20s than in any other period. Standard religious doctrine is not always accepted. Religious faith associated with positive characteristics, but it doesn't mean that as you hit emerging adulthood, you are going to follow through with what you've learned through your life. Religiosity has declined also with each successive generation. So as generations go on, and you can see in certain religions how attendance has decreased over time. And it's definitely something that we see a lot in American majority culture. Okay, moral development. What gave you your morals? Well, mom and dad played a part. Your religion may have played a part. Your church or whatever religious organization you attend. Piaget observed, and this is a ding, 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 so it may be on your test, observed children play games and practice and discuss rules. He came up with this two-stage based on cognitive development. Heterogeneous morality, which is around ages 4 to 7. Like, for instance, an example would be, you can't change the rules were made by my mother. So then you get onto autonomous morality, where you reach about ages 10 to 12. I dropped the glass by accident. That wasn't as bad as when Julie tore up her book because she was mad. It's interesting how we're throwing our sister under the bus so the attention goes off of us versus onto, goes off of us and onto somebody else. Maybe it's worse. Mom will focus on my sister versus myself. Now, moral reasoning, somebody that's very important here is Kohlberg. Ding, ding, ding. Kohlberg presented his participants with a hypothetical moral dilemma, asking them to make a judgment and explain the reason for their decision. Whether a person judged the action of the main character in the dilemma as right or wrong was not that important. Rather, his reasoning for the judgment was key to determining the stages of moral reasoning. So, moral development is based on cognitive development, according to Kohlberg. Stages of moral reasoning tend to increase with age. So, study participants did not skip stages here. Kohlberg believed moral development was cumulative, that it was correlated with socioeconomic status, intelligence, and educational level. It's interesting, too. His theory has been critiqued by many people or criticized. Carol Gilligan, who I consider to be, I guess, the female Freud, at least in my opinion, Carol Gilligan criticized the lack of females in Kohlberg's research, which, if you look at it, we need to look at both genders or all genders versus just one. Also, evidence here was not supported her theory of bias. So really, she had her opinion, and she had every right to have that opinion. Other critiques of Kohlberg, Kohlberg's coding system is biased towards Western values, he believed. There's a secular bias here also. And children learn moral beliefs specific to their culture. So your moral belief may be different than somebody in another culture in another country, especially the difference between your individualistic culture versus your collectivist culture. Now, worldview's approach to moral development, Jensen. The ultimate basis of morality is a person's worldview. Worldview is provided the basis of moral reasoning, according to Jensen. The outcome of moral reasoning is moral evaluations, which prescribe moral behaviors. So, moral behaviors reinforce our worldviews, according to Jensen. Now, Jensen continued in his theory and talked about 3 types of ethics based on worldviews: the ethics of autonomy, the ethics of community, and the ethics of divinity. The use of these 3 ethics varies by culture. The trajectory for the 3 ethics are considered templates, not necessarily fact, but they're templates that we start to follow, and they expand depending on what culture we come from. Now, political beliefs. We're going through a lot right now in our society, and we also have elections coming up and things like that. I'm not here to promote one political party versus another, but I do need to talk about political beliefs. Adelson studied political development in adolescence. The only variable found to be related to political thinking was age. The three key changes in cognitive mode is the development of formal operations, decline in authoritarian political views, and capacity to develop ideologies. Theories has not been applied to diverse cultures, more or less on the majority culture here. But it's interesting how our political views change as we get older, whether because of our income. It's interesting, like I had some clients that I was working with before, and not that this has anything to do with them, but they talked to me about how it's interesting how once, when they were younger, not making money, they were quote unquote Democrats. But as they got older and started to make good money, they changed based on their money. So they believed that the Republicans would help them save more money or not spend as much money. So it's interesting how things change based on our income or socioeconomic status. So marital status even can play a part because, again, you may be Democrat, your wife may be Republican. One may change based on being married. It's definitely a possibility. Now, emerging adults' political involvement, the low conventional participation, so low trust, high skepticism here. High participation in organizations that are devoted to issues, high volunteerism, involvement in strikes, demonstrations, protests, revolutionary movements, and terrorism, which is an extreme political movement, or political movements, I should say. We have a lot of protests going on in our society right now. Black Lives Matter protests, things like that are going on. But there's also in small, well, I won't say small, but in certain parts of our society, political demonstrations and protests also going on. And even when it comes to money, I work in human services. So as money gets taken from our field or human services field, people are protesting or doing petitions or things like that to get money put back in. We know that Murphy just took out like $66 million out of human services and put it into the schools. I'm not saying that's right or wrong, but people that are working in mental health are concerned that clients aren't getting the help they need due to facts of programs closing and things like that because there's no funding for them. So these are things that we look at as we look at culture too, because within our culture is one thing, but you also see political coups and things like that going on and revolutions going on in other countries where people aren't or can't afford to not be working or to put in the wrong politicians or things like that, or there's dictatorships going on. So you look at all societies and you have to understand, and this is important for all of you to understand, that a lot of times our views are based on the American majority culture, but within our own culture, we have other cultures. And we have to look at all of that. It's not just the American majority culture, but we also look at different cultures and what their beliefs are. Because a lot of times just because you come from this or you live in this country doesn't mean you believe in all their beliefs. And it's one of the things I talk about in lectures is like egocentrism for the adolescent. Well, the American majority culture has that form of egocentrism too, believing what we believe is right and other cultures are wrong. That doesn't necessarily mean it's accurate. So again, thank you for this chapter, Cultural Beliefs. Again, I told you it was one of the shorter chapters. Any questions, feel free to contact me and we can go over it. If you want to have a discussion, let me know. Okay, thank you. And again, that was chapter 4, Cultural Beliefs, and keep looking for chapters 5 through 13. Thanks a lot, and hopefully everybody's doing well and staying safe, and you are making sure you're completing all your Revel quizzes, and your exam is coming up. Well, let me reword that. This is after your first exam, so I will post it ahead of time, but you may already be done chapters 1 through 3 and just ready to sit down for the test. So good luck. Any questions or anything, let me know. And make sure, and I'll say this again for every exam, make sure if you're doing the extra credit that I get it the week of the exam. If I don't, then if it comes after that Friday, I will not accept it. So please get them in on time. Thank you and see you on the next lecture.